The Federation's Starfleet commissioned at least 12 heavy cruiser-type starships. The Constitution class, in the early to mid-23rd century, the Federation warship NCC-1701 was built in the San Francisco Fleet Yards in San Francisco, California, and was dubbed the Enterprise, in a long line of ships with the same name. Now, Captain Robert April was in charge of overseeing the ship's construction as well as its early trials. Sarah April, his wife, created various tools for the ship's sickbay. Dr. Richard Daystrom designed the Enterprise's computer systems, while Larry Marvick was one of the ship's designers. Captain April commanded the Enterprise when it was launched in 2245. Sarah April was the ship's first chief medical officer, and Captain April's first officer was Christopher Pike. Today, we're taking a look at Star Trek's the USS Enterprise. Hi, I'm Rob, and this is A Constantly Racing Mind. The USS Enterprise, NCC-1701, was a Federation Constitution-class starship operated by Starfleet in the 21st century. It was also the first ship with a registration to wear the name Enterprise. Captain Robert April commanded the ship from its launch in 2245 until 2250, when it was handed over to April's first officer, Christopher Pike. Starfleet Command purposely kept the Enterprise and its crew out of the action during the Klingon War because they believed the Enterprise to be the best of Starfleet and wanted it to survive. Between 2254 and 2256, the Enterprise received a refurbishment that significantly altered its form and appearance. Now, the Enterprise was tasked with analyzing one series of mysterious signals received throughout the galaxy after the conflict ended in 2257. Now, unfortunately, the Enterprise was dragged back to space dock after many catastrophic system failures, and Pike was moved to command the USS Discovery to continue the task of studying the red bursts. Now, after several months of repair, the Enterprise was returned to service with Captain Pike returning to command the ship and taking part in the battle with the Section 31 Artificial Intelligence Control. Pike's command of the Enterprise came to an end in 2265 when he was promoted to Fleet Captain, and the ship's command passed to Captain James T. Kirk. The Enterprise was involved in several first contacts, military conflicts, and time journeys during the 40 years of service and exploration thanks to improvements and at least 2 refits. However, the ship's most enduring reputation came from a 5-year voyage, 2265 to 2270, under Captain Kirk's leadership. Now, Kirk activated the ship's auto-destruct procedure to prevent the Enterprise from falling into Klingon hands above the Genesis planet in 2285, and the Enterprise was destroyed. Now, the USS Enterprise A quickly took its position. The Enterprise B was commissioned on stardate 9715.5 in the year 2293. Soon after, the spaceship was launched from a dry dock orbiting Earth under the leadership of Captain John Harriman. Now, on the other hand, the Enterprise B was the only ship within range that could respond to a distress signal from 2 Federation cargo ships, the SS LaCool and the SS Robert Fox. Unfortunately, the Robert Fox was destroyed before the Enterprise could take its passengers because the Enterprise lacked the requisite equipment to save the ships. Now, only 47 people were rescued from the LaCool before it was wrecked as well. Chekhov acted as makeshift medical officer, recruiting the cooperation of numerous journalists, including Guinan, the future bartender on the USS Enterprise D, and Tolian Soren to treat survivors. However, when the Enterprise maneuvered within transporter range of the LaCool in 2293, she became entangled within the Nexus. Scott devised a scheme to recreate an antimatter explosion and release the Enterprise using a resonance burst from the deflector dish. The Enterprise made it out with minor injuries and a hull breach on decks 13 through 15. Sections 20 through 28, Kirk was assumed to have died in the breach, and the mission became well known due to his death. The Enterprise B was followed by the Ambassador-class USS Enterprise C somewhere between 2293 and 2344. Now, the USS Enterprise NCC-1701C was a Federation Ambassador-class starship operated by Starfleet in the 21st century. Now, this Enterprise was the 4th Federation spaceship to bear the name, and Captain Rachel Garrett was the ship's commanding officer in 2344. Before the Enterprise responded to a distress call from the Klingon outpost at Narenda 3 under attack by the Romulan Star Empire. Now, when the Enterprise arrived at the outpost, she was engaged by four Romulan warbirds. The ship suffered significant damage to her warp nacelles and external hull, with 125 crew members surviving. Now, the crew discovered that the outpost of Narenda 3 had been completely destroyed and a state of war existed between the Klingon Empire and the Federation. Now, both crews, the D and the C, eventually realized that the current timeline resulted from the Enterprise C's absence from the battle and determined that the Enterprise C needed to return to its own time through the rift. Now, while the Enterprise D assisted in the repairs, both ships soon came under attack from the Klingons, and Captain Garrett was subsequently killed. Now, Richard Castillo assumed command of the ship. For the protection of the Enterprise D, he took the ship back into the rift and returned to 2344. The Enterprise C returned at the same time it left its timeline. It engaged in the Romulans and was eventually destroyed. Now, this is the battle where Lieutenant Tasha Yar from the Enterprise D requests permission to transfer to the Enterprise C, as she would rather her death have meaning. Now, the crew is captured and Yar gives birth to a human Romulan child named Selim. Now, this brings us to the Enterprise D. The Enterprise was built at the Utopia Planitia Fleet Yards in the Sol system orbiting Mars. Now, thousands of individuals from all disciplines were involved in the building. So let's take a look at what we have here. Now, Commander Quinteros oversaw the construction, and much of the Enterprise's warp drive system was designed by Dr. Leah Brahms, and some of the Enterprise's components were developed on the USS Pegasus. Now, the Enterprise was launched from Mars on stardate 40759.5 in the year 2363. There were several versions of the dedication plaque, and we'll take a look at them one in a little bit here. Now, Earth Station McKinley was the site of the final system completion and shakedown, and on the direction of Rear Admiral Nora Sati, Captain Jean-Luc Picard assumed command of the ship on stardate 41148. This came from Amazon, but it was made by Eaglemoss and sold by Mike's House of Collectibles. I purchased from Mike before. Now, this plaque is slightly larger than the USS Franklin plaque. This one measures 8.5 by 6 3/8 inches, which is 21.59 centimeters by 16.1925 centimeters, and made of cold cast resin. You will notice that there are 4 columns, and in the first one they have listed as admirals. The show's producers, which includes executive, line, and production producers. Listed at the top, of course, is Gene Roddenberry, the show's creator. Now, the next column lists captains as those involved with production design. Third column involves those who work with visual effects. And what I thought was odd is that under this column is Ronald D. Moore, one of the show's writers, who apparently wore many hats, including visual effects. Moore, along with David Icke, reimagined Battlestar Galactica in 2003 and 2004. Now, in the final column are those who work in the art department, where the dreams become visualizations. Some of the Enterprise's components were developed on the USS Pegasus and were used on the Enterprise. Now, the Enterprise had to safeguard the Pegasus, an experimental ship with sophisticated technology, from falling into Romulan hands. It was considered lost many, many years ago. In the 7 years that Picard commanded the Enterprise D, he forged a new trail of adventures and discovery. Now, many species made their first formal contact with the Enterprise D. The Enterprise completed the first high warp 4.96 saucer separation while fleeing from an alien known as Q. Then the traveler utilized the power of his thoughts to propel the Enterprise faster than warp 10 to a galaxy called M33, according to the ship's instruments. Now, the traveler's subsequent use of the warp drive carried the Enterprise to the edge of the universe at a speed that never exceeded warp 1.5. The Enterprise received a computer refit in 2364, and later that year, the Enterprise was hijacked from Starbase 74 by the Binars. They intended to use the ship to repair the damaged computer on their homeworld. The Enterprise was returned to Captain Picard's control following the incident, and the Binars freely accepted the consequences of their actions. Now, during its first encounter with the Borg, sections 27, 28, and 29 on decks 4, 5, and 6 were removed for analysis by the Borg. The Enterprise was returned to Captain Picard's control following the incident, and the Binars freely accepted the consequences of their actions. Now, during its first encounter with the Borg, sections 27, 28, and 29 on decks 4, 5, and 6 were removed for analysis by the Borg, and 18 people were killed. Now, the Enterprise had traveled 10,000 light years by 2366, but unfortunately the Enterprise was heavily damaged during the Borg incursion in 2366 and the one in 2367. Now, after a cutting beam destroyed the engineering hull, Deck 36, including the main engineering section, which was decompressed, killing at least 11 people and perhaps 8 more. Now, the Enterprise was one of the first Starfleet ships to land at Deep Space Nine, offloading the majority of the station's Starfleet contingent, as well as the station's first complement of Danube-class runabouts. The Enterprise returned to Deep Space Nine a few weeks later to assist in rehabilitating the Bajoran aqueduct system that had been damaged during the Cardassian occupation of Bajor. Now, on board the Enterprise D, one of the most significant discoveries in the Federation history was made. Its crew pieced together Dr. Galen's final research to understand the message from the ancient humanoids, the Milky Way galaxy's first humanoid species. The ancient humanoids were among the oldest sentient species in the Milky Way galaxy and probably the first humanoid race to emerge on an ancient planet. They flourished 4.5 billion years ago, according to the cosmos, but discovering no other life forms similar to themselves. And in 2370, the Enterprise became one of the few Federation ships to utilize a cloaking technology, and possibly the first to use a phasing cloak effectively. It had been retrieved from the wreckage of the USS Pegasus and was installed aboard the Enterprise to allow it to pass through an asteroid after a Romulan vessel sealed the ships inside. Late in 2371, the Enterprise received a distress signal from the Armagosa Systems Observatory. Now, Commander Riker's away team discovered the station had been attacked by Romulans, and they found an injured Dr. Tolian Soren. Now, when they were ambushed, Soren launched a solar probe that destroyed the Armagosa star, causing a level 12 shockwave. Now, the Enterprise then exited the system as the observatory was destroyed. Now, Picard spoke with Data in the stellar cartography after speaking with Guinan about Soren and the Nexus. Picard realized that Soren was modifying the ribbon, the Nexus's ribbons route, and he deduced that Soren was going for the Viridian system and ordered Worf to set course at maximum warp. Now, when the Enterprise arrived on Viridian 3, the Klingon bird of prey was intercepted. However, the Klingons agreed to a prisoner exchange because LaForge was captured at one point. Now, this enabled Picard to beam to Soren's location somewhere on the planet's surface in his place. Now, the ship's magnetic interlocks were breached, and before efforts to repair them could be performed, a coolant leak occurred, resulting in an inescapable warp core breach. The crew was ordered to evacuate from the secondary hull to the saucer section by Commander Riker. Now, after the evacuation was complete, the saucer could be separated and moved to a safe distance before the core breach destroyed the star drive portion. Dr. Crusher and LaForge monitored their respective departments' evacuations, which were accomplished with a minute to spare. The saucer's impulse engines fired as soon as it cleared the secondary hull, but it couldn't get far enough away before the core burst. The explosion created an ion shockwave that rendered the saucer part useless and sent it into a deteriorating orbit around Viridian 3, driving the saucer section into the planet's atmosphere. Now, as the saucer approached the planet's surface, Data could transfer the auxiliary systems to the lateral thrusters, restoring thruster control and leveling out their descent. Unfortunately, the saucer crashed into a rainforest on the planet's surface, moments later destroying numerous trees in the process. The Enterprise suffered few injuries as a result of a reasonably safe landing. Now, unfortunately, the ship's primary hull was severely damaged during the conflict and subsequent crash landing, rendering it unsalvageable. Nevertheless, 3 Starfleet ships, including the Nebula-class USS Farragut, an Oberth-class ship, and a Miranda-class ship, rescued the ship's crew. Say that this is where Jean-Luc Picard found it necessary to seek aid of the great Captain Kirk to help him save the day. So, appreciate if you share your comments about the prop, and if you found this video entertaining, please give it a like and share it with your Trek friends, and watch the video right here for more Star Trek props, or this one right over here that YouTube thinks you will like. So thanks for watching, and take care.